From the very beginning, Edinburgh has been a garden town. The houses were lined up on the rocky ridge between the Palace of Holyrood House and the castle, and behind each one was garden ground. Many of these green spaces have been lost, but this morning we're here in one of the precious survivors, Dunbar Close, in Edinburgh's Canongate. Amanda, what kind of plants and herbs would be here in a traditional garden like Dunbar Close?
Well, this is probably quite true to its historic form. The lawn came in much later, and these box hedges giving us sections of arable planting would have been consistent with the garden in its historical environment. But the plants have probably changed somewhat over the years. I found calendula, marigold, pot marigolds today, and that, we're talking 15th and 16th century, would have been really useful, in fact, as well as being quite useful for fungal infections. It was also a protectant. It would have stopped you falling into the hands of malevolent fairies, which I find, knowing how badly behaved the Fae and their kind are in Scotland is probably quite useful. But we've also got sage, which is associated with wisdom and memory enhancing. We've got lemon balm, which would have brought you sleep and also increased your brain's ability to remember. And then we've got herbs we don't use quite so often today, like this southernwood. Probably people are more familiar with the stories surrounding wormwood, which of course became famous for absinthe. But mugwort, wormwood, southernwood are all in the Artemisia family, and they would have been very popular in the 16th, 17th centuries.
So almost every plant had some kind of functional use, often medicinal or for cooking perhaps?
Culinary, yes, absolutely. And Edinburgh would have seen a great selection of spices, as well as the plants that we could grow here, brought in the historical period. Scotland had a wealthy and quite healthy, vibrant trade in spices. So there would have been a lot of culinary herbs. We've got all sorts of things that we don't use so much in cooking in here today. Again, the Artemisia family found its way into cooking more often. Sage, you will know. I mean, if you think about those dishes like pork with sage leaves, or all those sort of very aromatic dishes would have been hugely popular. And of course, having the advantage of medicinal effect as well, because the antibacterial, antimicrobial properties of the herbs in the cooking would have worked quite well when we didn't have modern refrigeration techniques, for example. But yeah, there would have been a lot of onions, garlic, aromatic herbs grown for cooking, and there would have probably also been a lot of dye plants.
Interesting. But we can see also that at that time, the idea of a situtary, just enjoying the garden. I mean, here we are, the sun's baking down. It's like this in Scotland all the time, of course,
Yeah.
So, I mean, in those times, right back to medieval times, that idea of taking the air, being in the garden as a pleasant place.
Absolutely. And there are stories that suggest that people were very aware of the benefits of sitting out in nature. We quite often find historical mention of how important it is to be able to smell the greenery and step away from the sort of disease-infected streets, but also just finding peace and calm and watching plants. We know that people enjoyed that. It's written about quite extensively. It creeps into our fairy tales, our folklore.
So it also feels like the garden could be quite a secret place, you know. We could be in here this morning and I could be consulting you about how to murder somebody.
Well,
I
you
mean,
could.
I don't, is there anything, any tips on that? Anything that doesn't leave many traces?
I don't know whether I want to be captured on film telling you, Donald. Do you think you could give me a bit more information about your intended plans? Yeah, you could happily polish someone off with one of Scotland's most toxic plants without moving more than a couple of yards from where we're sat right now.
Right.
I'm not telling you anymore in case you don't like the outcome of the stories I'm telling you
Excellent,
today.
excellent. Anyway, it's all about healing and hope, not poisons.
Do you know, the funny thing about the poisons is we actually are using them now to treat more complex conditions that we're more aware of in modern times, and because of modern medicine's ability to extract things and use it slightly more gracefully than we could in ancient times, in a more delicate is probably a better word to use. Actually, those poisons usually have some kind of remedial use when used incredibly.
Controlled harm can also
Controlled
heal.
harm has its moments. I'd like to share a wee story with you now, inspired by the plants growing here in Dunbar's garden. There was a certain Janet Boisman. She may well have been one of the first women healers tried as a witch in Scotland. She lived just over the road. She was tried, we understand, for trying to allay a fever, bring someone's temperature down, find a febrifuge. And she resorted to dipping shirts into a well not so far from here, a well that no doubt had healing properties. But I wonder if she'd have been better off crossing the road here to this beautiful green place and finding yarrow, Achillea. Yarrow has been used since ancient times to bring down fevers, to heal wounds. It's said to have been gifted to Achilles by Chiron, the centaur and renowned herbal healer, to heal his Achilles tendon, the back of his heels, the bit his mother did not manage to make immortal when she dumped him into the river Styx. Chiron is said to have given yarrow to Achilles, and Achilles kept it by his side on the battlefields. Janet may have done well to heed those ancient stories and find herself some yarrow, brew it up in an infusion, maybe add a little bit of elder blossom, some peppermint, and give it to her patient, because that would have brought the temperature down surely, and nobody would have known of our other healing ways. Yarrow feeds into a lot of the witches' stories in Scotland. The last witch in Scotland is said to have been accused because she was divining with stalks of the plant. But although the witches may have dissipated into the shadows, yarrow is still very much here in all of Scotland's green places and cultivated beautifully in many hidden gardens because it's very effective. It really does help bring down a temperature. It really will help heal wounds. It's great for pollinators and it smells beautiful. Even sitting next to it and watching those feathery green fronds blow in the breeze lifts the mind and cheers the soul. I hope you've enjoyed the story, and if you find a bit of yarrow, maybe pick a bit for yourself. Inhale that scent and carry it with you, just in case you need a bit of your own.
We're crossing the Water of Leith in Craiglockhart Dell. And these lovely trees are not here by accident. They're planted as part of the Red Hall estate. But we've come here today to visit the old walled garden at Red Hall, which has been transformed by the Scottish Association for Mental Health. The garden is designed to constantly surprise us as we meet new spaces. A timber henge with a fire pit. You can imagine autumn stories round a bonfire. A formal outdoor garden to sit in the sun. And then more secret routes and journeys, taking us to places you can be solitary and contemplative. And a gazebo for gatherings and meetings, sitting in these beautiful surroundings. But this is a working garden too. Here are the plots where the trainees focus on the humdrum, day-by-day reality of garden work. So Nuala, as a trainee here, what kind of jobs do you get involved in doing?
Well, as well as my own plot, which I have managed my own time with what I do in it, we have 1 hour chunks of work where we get offered a choice between whether it's something, well, weeding is always, it's a constant in any garden, and then maybe some pruning or tidying up or getting in among the shrubbery. Some people do mowing. I've not dared tackle the mower yet. Need training, but maybe someday. Fruit picking, harvesting of the carrots or the strawberries when they were there, lettuces. I mean, it's a bit of everything really. We have polytunnels, so we can go in and the strawberries are not strawberries, tomatoes. The tomatoes in the polytunnels are lovely. This year we've grown some aubergines, which are the ones that you can really see why Americans call them eggplants, because they're like egg-shaped rather than the kind of longer ones that we're more used to seeing maybe in the shops here.
So what's your kind of plans for your own plot?
For my own plot, I have it till November because we rotate them every year. So this year, as you can see, I've had quite a shaded space, and maybe next year I might get a touch of sun. We'll see. And I've got a Brussels sprout that I'm hoping to get going to have some Brussels on the table in December. I've got some kale. I had potatoes here, and the potatoes that came up were gorgeous, but there was a touch of potato blight going around, so we got them all up. I've got some lettuce here, because the lettuce you can kind of come back and plant some more and take it, so it's not really seasonal. I've got some what's called mizuna, which is a very hardy Chinese green, which you can kind of wilt and fry with some garlic and sesame, and that's another one that will just kind of keep growing as long as you leave it there. I'm hoping my sunflowers will finally bloom. They're looking very promising. I've got a courgette plant, which has been producing about 2 or 3 a week, but now that we're heading towards the equinox, it might slow down a bit, which I think the family will probably appreciate. It's hard to remember that we are really close to an A road. We're still pretty close to the city centre of Edinburgh, but actually it's just very quiet and a little bit removed. It's a little, oasis, I guess. You can either, if you're in a chatty mood, you chat with the other people you're working with. If you're in a quieter mood, you can maybe ask to have a bit of work that's a bit further away, but still close to people, still people around, but you're not pushing yourself through that tiredness if you don't want to be a very social person. It's a space where you can be as social or not as you want to be, but still come here and be around other people and just, get what's the word I'm looking for? Profit from being in this space and touching the ground and reading.
And here in the polytunnel, the tomatoes do look and smell delicious. That red's a clue. Look at the brickwork on the old garden wall. Everything contained within that original sheltering garden structure. And all the plants and herbs growing. You can come and buy things for your own garden here. So Nicola, this is the centenary of the Scottish Association for Mental Health. What part does the garden here at Redhall play in the work of the charity?
Well, this particular garden is one of the first horticultural services that SAMH had. It's our SAMH centenary of 100 years. The garden here itself we've been running for the last 30 years, so it's our 30th anniversary. SAMH have long known the benefits of therapeutic horticulture. They've been doing it for a long time. We've got various other services across Scotland, so Evergreen in Kirkcaldy, we've got Grownforth in Dunfermline, and we've got Chrysalis in Dundee.
There's a special atmosphere in these places. So what is that? How do you think that sort of nurtures people's well-being? What's the experience in these gardens?
If I had £1 for every time somebody came down into the garden and said, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe this was so close to the city. It's such a beautiful space. It's peaceful. You walk down the track and it's just gorgeous."
So what attracted you to this whole working in gardens thing?
Well, actually, I kind of came. The gardening itself, I always loved gardening. I've done that even as a child. I used to love gardening, particularly with my uncle, because he used to grow fruit and vegetables. And then I became a self-employed gardener for a lot of years. One of the downsides to being a gardener, though, you spend an awful lot of time on your own. Which is great for a few years, but after a while that can get a little dull. And a friend of mine asked me, who worked at Chrysalis in Dundee, and asked me if I wanted to do a couple of days a week work with them. Never thought of working in mental health at all. Wasn't on my radar whatsoever, really. But I thought, I'll give it a go, and I went along and absolutely loved it straight away, and I've been doing it ever since, really.
So it adds a kind of social dimension to
Well,
the
I
atmosphere
think I
of the
got out of it
garden.
what other people get out of it. That working in a group, supporting each other, working on a task, seeing it from start to finish, and seeing a job well done, is really motivating and enjoyable.
And of
And a lot of
course,
camaraderie. There's a lot of fun in working in groups in gardens. There's a lot of banter goes on.
lovely. And so the the garden here and the association are part of a whole set of partnerships across Edinburgh.
Yeah, that's right. We're part of Thriving Spaces, which includes us, SAMH, and support Change Mental Health and Wheatley Care, who run Stafford Centre and Barony Contact Point in Edinburgh. So they're all quite big services. They're all citywide services, and support a lot of people through the year. We're also part of the Physical Activity in Green Spaces, which includes SAMH Redhall with Edinburgh Leisure, Cyrenians, and Edinburgh Lothian Green Space Trust. So we've been working in partnership with them for quite a few years as well. I guess one of the biggest things is kind of seeing the change it has in people. When they come to the garden, they might be really anxious, and not been doing anything for quite a long time. That their world shrunk a little bit because they're not seeing so much of their friends anymore, or their family, and actually coming to the garden. I always think it's a bit socialising. It's a bit like a muscle. You've got to keep working it, and if you haven't been around people for a while, it can be very awkward. And but coming here, it kind of breaks that a little. People have often said, they feel like they can be themselves when they're here. They don't have to put a front on. people understand what's going on for them, and then actually seeing them build their confidence up through, over generally often a short period of time. Learning new skills, that helps builds people's confidence. Getting a bit fitter, just getting in touch with nature, that's really powerful. And then, seeing them progress, whether that's going back to the job that they used to do, or looking for a different career, or for some people it might be moving on into volunteering. We support people with that as well. We have an employability person here who will help people with all those next steps.
Prominent on the old Dalkeith Road is the Bridge End farmhouse. Once the farmland here served the lairds of the Inch and of Craigmillar Castle. But in recent years, the farmhouse has been repurposed as a community hub. The facilities include the old restored buildings, but also new buildings, such as the Eco Bothy for family and other events. The farmyard now has craft workshops and another covered event space. And surrounding the farm buildings are the community allotments and the community orchard. Run by Bridge End Inspiring Growth, this is a very old place that has been repurposed and renewed to meet the challenges of the 21st century climate crisis.
Or I could tell you a story here. Are you busy? Yes. A story about apples, perhaps. Yeah. A story I can tell. Yeah. Shall we have an apple-themed story?
Yeah.
Long ago, before there was all this, before these trees were here, before there was Craigmillar, before there was Inch Park, before there was Bridge End, before there was Edinburgh, there was bare rock. Nothingness, longing to be claimed by something. Bare rock that gave way to life. Lichen and moss breaking down the rock into new spaces. Spaces for seeds to blow in on the wind, to take root, to drink the rain, to eat the sun, to grow and give life to a vast forest that stretched from coast to coast across the land. A forest teeming with life. Invisible threads of community connecting bird to beast, to tree, to plant, to the fungus beneath the soil, reaching out its threads. Until the people came. The humans came, they changed the land. They felled the trees, they tilled the land, they grew crops, they built cities from the very rock, formed millions of years ago. And these pockets of green, these spaces of wildness and of connection were restricted to little islands in the great cities. But in these places, the old stories still exist for those willing to hear them. Those who are willing to go deeper to find them. For the land itself speaks in story. All you have to do is listen.
I'm wee. I'm new. I'm just wee. I'm growing. I'm getting independent, and I'm playing in the barn. I'm expanding and I'm exploring the space around me. Outside the inch, I'm connected with life and the natural progression of it. I'm growing. I'm free. I explore life, new places, new friends, and enemies. Long life's path. must return to my beginnings. I'm exhausted. I've arrived. I'm home. I ken my surroundings. I'm the same. Something different. I'm new again. I'm content. I'm sad. Where's my mum?
I stop and immerse myself in the dry grass meadows, the fern-soaked rocky edges and the channeled wetlands. Fox, mushroom, snipe. The sound of every hedge-hidden bird, the buzzard cries above. I flush the sharp call of the snipe. The wind disturbs the grasses and branches, a stream gurgles underground, and a flock of goldfinch decorate the shrubby trees lining the path. I am present.
Today was my first day at Bridgend. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I got on my bike and I cycled down here and I saw the sign that said apple pressing this way, and I walked into a community of people all sat around chopping the apples, pressing them with the manual press, filtering it, and we all shared a glass of the juice at the end. The reason that I decided to come down here today is that I had been really struggling with the overwhelming feeling of living in a city. Me and my friend Ella had been discussing recently how we feel like the city is covered in concrete, and this idea that, you know, nature is contained by concrete in some sense in the city. So I thought I needed to explore and try and find a way to become more connected with the nature around me. But more than this, I was looking for a connection with people too, which is something that these spaces offer. I've always felt that being in nature and feeling connected to nature are actually two different things, and trying to find a space in which you feel a part of your surroundings as much relies on human beings as it does rely on the nature around you. So today, like coming together with a group of people to sit and, you know, using natural products, but it's more like a vehicle by which you can be together, actually allowed me to feel a much deeper connection with the materials that I was working with. I kind of hope that looking more into the future, especially for young people, this sort of need to be together with people outside should be centered more as part of, you know, everyday like happiness. I'm sure I'll be coming back a lot more.
So Sarah, why did David Ainsley give virtually all his money to create this Astley Ainsley Hospital?
It's a sad story, and it's an old-fashioned story in the sense, because he was a member of a large family of people called Ainsley and Astley Ainsley, and as the century passed, the 19th century passed, the men all died out, and he had inherited the responsibility for his nephew, who was, as a child, as an infant, so that he became the father of John Astley Ainsley. And he reared him, and John Astley Ainsley lived and thrived and went to university and was just starting out in life at about the age of 26 when he fell ill. And I don't know what he fell ill from, but it may have been tuberculosis. But they evidently decided to go around the Mediterranean and see if they could find good health for him, take him away from the Scottish climate. And while they were in the Mediterranean, in Morocco, John Astley Ainsley died. So at the end of the century, there was David Ainsley entirely alone, and his name, in the sense that mattered so much then, was dying out. So he thought that there were two things in his mind, obviously. One was the idea that convalescence was so important, and that whilst the rich could do this thing of going abroad, going up Swiss mountains to get better air, which didn't always work, but it was something very positive and good to do. The poor, and particularly the poor who were in the Royal Infirmary, couldn't do that. So they came straight out of the infirmary and went straight back into the slums. So the whole thing, particularly tuberculosis, went on round in a circle and was lethal. And he thought, well, if we build a really good convalescent hospital where people would have the time and the space to recover, this would be a wonderful thing. And he was very careful. He inherited all this money from his brothers and his nephews, and he was obviously very careful with it, because when he died, he said to his trustees, it was a pretty fat sum, invest it for 15 years, that was it. And of course, by the time 15 years had passed, they were in the middle of the First World War. So that was not a good moment for investment. And that, of course, was again followed by the slump, which was not good for investment. But by the 1920s, they had raised a really fat sum of money. And they went out and they came to South Edinburgh and they said, right, we will have this piece of land which is above Morningside, facing south on a slope, with a magnificent view of the hills, full of sky, if you like, if you know what I mean, and based on a number of good big gardens, old gardens, full of trees and plants, so that it was a natural place to take people who had spent their lives in a totally miserable situation, to be brought back to the idea of what life was meant to be, into nature.
So we're on the sunny side.
We're on the
we're,
sunny
we're
side.
almost starting a journey out towards the Pentlands and the big kind of green corridor. So there was something quite special about some of these houses and gardens, though, that he lit on.
Well,
Tell
it was
us a wee bit
an
about
extremely special place, and it goes back a long time. It goes back to the 12th century, I think, when the king gave us a strip of land, a great swathe of land out from the city of Edinburgh for the common good, which was kept as woodland, open land, and was for general use. And that, of course, in the 17th and 18th century got nibbled away, but by the 16th century, it still was this open space, and that was where the plague victims were brought out, and there was a plague chapel. And I don't know how many of them survived in this situation, but given the differences between the slums, again, of the Royal Mile, a remarkable place for slums and the history of slums, but it was that they were expected to die, of course, because the plague killed within 4 or 5 days. But some people must have survived, and there was a chapel there where you could pray, and the whole thing must have been, at least to a degree, cheering. But of course, inevitably, there is a major cemetery there. But in the 19th century, it all got divided up into large houses, big houses with big gardens. And these were, several of them were occupied by serious medical figures, people like James Syme, who was head of the Royal Infirmary himself, and Joseph Lister, who was his son-in-law, Agnes Lister, who was his daughter, who married Joseph Lister. And these people knew how important this was. James Syme grew everything from pineapples to medicinal herbs, and tried out all manner of things for the Botanic Gardens. So that it was a place with great history of health. It was obviously a naturally healthy place. So that when the trustees of the Astley Ainsley saw this, they thought, aha, this is just exactly what we want, and moved in.
So there was already that sense of gardens as
Yeah.
a kind of place of healing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of that. And
Yes,
the trees,
yeah.
some of the trees were quite special.
Some of the trees are immensely special, and there are extraordinary stories, like, for instance, that where the chapel used to be, has a lot of really good trees, because the family, the Ivory family, she was the heiress of the glue works in Gorgie, which is wonderful. They spent their money on investing in a seed collecting company which went to North America, which brought back seeds, so that those trees were part of this astonishing expedition, and the first time these things were seen in Edinburgh. Great big towering trees, including a giant redwood, which is astonishing.
So this is a special green space, but the hospital at some juncture is going to close.
Yes.
So it becomes important what's going to happen to this space.
Yes, it's immensely important because it's quite big. It is big. It is, I mean, the word kind of carbon sink sounds a bit kind of heavy, but the point is that it generates health, it generates oxygen. It's an open space so that you can breathe and you can look. I can remember the first time I went in, which was only about 5-6 years ago. I coming along Grange Lone with the traffic doing that chong, chong, chong thing past me, kind of huddled into the wall, turned into the gate, and it suddenly went quiet. And you could hear a small bird singing over there. And it was astonishing because it was like going from the center of a city to the country. And that's the effect we want to hang on to because it's so good. It's necessary. We need nature. We're part of nature. We're not something different. That's where we came from. That's what we desperately need in cities.
The tree behind me is a Himalayan birch tree. It's one of the trees that has been befriended by friends of the Astley Ainsley. A lady called Caroline, who's a doctor, has befriended this tree. And she liked it because historically the bark has been used for bandages, and in Nepalese and Indian culture the bark has also been used in some traditional remedies. It's a popular ornamental tree in this country, but it was first discovered and named by a Scottish botanist back in 1825. And it has been one of the trees that is much admired in the grounds here. These two willow trees were befriended by a brother and sister who a couple of years ago were 8 and 10 when they picked these trees, and they liked the fact that they were in close proximity to each other. Alexander, who was 8 at the time, liked the fact that when he climbed into the willow, he found that the leaves and the branches hung down and created a sort of cocoon round him. While Elizabeth, who was 10 at the time, liked the fact that the willow leaves, she felt, reminded her of when she woke up in the morning and her long hair was all over her face and she had to part it. So she had that very sort of tactile sort of sense of the tree and how personal it was to her. The tree behind me was befriended by a lady called Cleffin, who is a retired occupational therapist. And she picked this tree because it was planted back in 1997 as a commemorative tree to record 60 years of occupational therapy on the site here. It's unusual as a redwood because, unlike the others, it is a deciduous tree and will start to drop its leaves in the next few weeks. And if you come back over the winter, it will just look like a single spike pointing up to the sky. But it's lovely to watch the leaves come through again in the spring. The tree I'm standing beside now is the tree I picked as the tree that I wanted to befriend at the beginning of the campaign. It wasn't immediately my favourite tree on the site, but I felt that for publicity's sake, I needed an iconic tree that would be really, really identifiable in photographs and make a big statement. So I picked this Atlas cedar. I then discovered that the Atlas cedar had been planted to mark VE Day on the 8th of May 1945, making it almost 80 years old. However, this information isn't readily available, and I think it's a great pity that more people didn't know that that was why the tree was planted. It's special to me for that reason because in 1945 on VE Day, my grandfather was a prisoner of war in Stanley Prisoner of War Camp in Hong Kong, and my mother, as a baby, had just been evacuated on one of the last ships to leave Singapore before the fall of Singapore, and was arriving in Australia with her mother and 2 of her siblings. So it's a special tree for me for that reason. And I love its shape, I love the cones, I love the fact that it doesn't really change all year. In the middle of winter, I can come here and it's still a little green oasis to come and hug up. This is a Bhutan pine. It's about 150 years old and it's the only pine on the site. It has the most amazing banana-shaped cones which mature into these pretty cones here, and they're very popular among the locals who like to gather them for Christmas decorations. The tree has been befriended by a lady called Val who likes its elephantine features because an elephant features in her family crest. She also likes the location of the tree because it reminds her of a tea planter's bungalow in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was when she lived there. Her sister in 1965 visited Bhutan, and so that was another family connection that made her very keen to pick this particular tree to befriend. This is a deodar, and it's a mammoth tree. Each of its trunks rising vertically feels like it should be an individual tree in its own right. It was befriended by a lady called Frances, who felt that this part of the site feels more abandoned and has less footfall, and she didn't want it to be forgotten about. She likes it because she feels that she can feel a sense of history when she comes here and imagines all the people in the past who must have walked past and enjoyed this tree.
Not every garden is an oasis of quiet. Sometimes that's not the point. Leith Community Croft is situated at the west side of the links, right in the heart of Old Leith. There are the crofters' plots, often worked by groups rather than an individual. And at the top end of the site, the market garden, where volunteers work, supported by a staff member. And in the centre of the site, the hard surface leading up to the new education centre and cafe, adapted from a disused sports pavilion. So Evie, this all started with pots and planters and playgrounds and backyards. What was it like to suddenly arrive to face 2 acres of undeveloped ground?
Well, I remember very clearly the very day that we came in here, actually. We came in with Gwen Rowland, who's one of our co-founders, who's since moved on. But we came in and had a look at the land, and our first sort of reaction was just how big the project would be. From growing little crops and pots in a concrete back garden to taking on 2 acres of land was pretty daunting. And I remember Gwen and I discussing whether we should go ahead. It seemed like quite a big challenge for such a small grassroots organisation. But there was a bit of sort of excitement around for both of us, and we discussed it together, and we were like, this could be really amazing. It's a big project and we don't know how we will fund it, or really the scale of the challenge seemed pretty massive, but there was a bit of excitement that, yeah, we could do something really special here, so we decided we'd go for it.
So a brave decision.
Yes.
There had been tennis courts here that had been grubbed up. There was hardcover gravel. So how did you manage to recruit enough folk to start actually turning this into a garden?
Well, the very first thing that we done was we had an event called Imagine What We Would Do with This Space. And we weren't sure if anybody would turn up at all, but really probably about 50 or 60 people turned up. people arrived on stilts and juggling and all sorts of a variety of people. And we had a good look around on the site, and you know, there was just an awful lot of excitement, a lot of community sort of driven activity, but the site was a mess. You know, it was a very derelict part of Leith Links. It was sort of a forgotten part of the park. And you know, it was a lot of sort of nefarious activity that got on, condoms, drug paraphernalia, dog poo, and the clean-up operation was massive. You know, we had about 20 or 30 people come along on the clean-up day, and we picked up all sorts of plastic waste, and we recycled as much of it as we possibly could. And then we really sort of got around to sort of consult them with the people who were getting involved on what they would like to see happen in the space. And yeah, and then we just sort of built it bit by bit from then on.
Leith is many things, but Leith is an island. It's not an island exactly because it's not in the sea, but it did grow up beside the sea. Some of it was built by humans from the sea, but Leith is an island by thought. Even when it came connected to something bigger, it remained an island. Leith is an island by choice. But what is a Leither? Or who is a Leither? The water of Leith bears Leith's name, but it doesn't start in Leith. It bubbles up from out of the ground in hills south of the city, in the Pentlands, and it rolls narrow and slowly through the rock and through the farmland until it reaches Balerno. But there, it's not the water of Balerno. It passes through to Curry, but it's still not the water of Curry. Through Collington, through Haymarket, through Stockbridge, until it reaches an undefined, moving border. It moves into Leith, now grand and bubbling and full of life and life-giving qualities. There are rats and eider ducklings and goosander and blue tits and people everywhere, and it flows out under the ground into the green spaces of the island, nourishing them at Bonington, Pilrig, at Leith Links. But what and who is a Leither? You tell me.
So the people who work here, it's not like an allotment. They're called crofters, community crofters.
Yep.
This is the Leith Croft, and so different groups work different areas of the ground.
That's right, yeah. So it's very different from allotments, mostly because allotments are closed off to the community, but the croft here, because it's on common good land, is very much open. Anyone can come in any time of the day. And people who do grow their own veg are called crofters, named after the consultation to actually name the bit of land, which we did decide to call a croft. And to have an urban croft in the middle of the city is just quite an interesting thing. People say, well, you don't have crofting in the lowlands. But actually there's a croft up by the Scottish Parliament, Crofton Rye. I think that's how it's pronounced. And so we wanted to sort of embody the whole sort of Crofton ethos. So people grow in collective groups. There's all sorts of different groups. There's young families with young children, or there's middle-aged people who are just single crofters, and they all have their individual plots, but they work together as a team. And then there's younger groups who are environmental, and they do crop rotation on their area. And so the whole idea is to try and encourage that whole collective spirit and the community sort of working together, so that they're doing their seed sharing, they're, you know, when they're going away, that someone else will look after their space, so that there's very little neglect of the area that's being cultivated. And that works really well. There's a bit of a sort of north-south divide between the crofters and the market garden, which is further up. Traditionally, we've had lots of issues over water. If you turned water on at one end of the croft, it would go off at the market garden end. So there was a lot of community engagement and community discussion around how we could sort of improve the systems and make the systems work. So there's a lot of sort of that relationship building and building up trust and over the years and finding ways to work together. I think the croft is really interesting because there's so many people growing collectively in the croft area. There's a huge diversity of crops in the croft, because it's not like you know, a whole bed of potatoes or potato crops or pumpkins. There's like flowers, there's all sorts of things interdispensed in such a smaller space. But there's a huge diversity of people as well. There's from tiny little babies who come along with their mums as part of nursing groups. There's toddlers right through to people who are retired, and then lots of ages in between that. So the diversity in nationality, different cultures as well, because Leith is very cultured.
So of course, it's not just growing the food environmentally, you're also very interested in how that food is used and the whole feeding into the well-being agenda. And you've got a new education centre and cafe here. So what's that kind of wider vision about how we use food?
So the whole system is sort of works together. So we're growing the food. The food is local for a start. It's going straight from the croft either into our cafe or into our sort of farm shop to be sold. The crofters all grow food sort of collectively, and if there is a glut of courgettes or pumpkins and too much that they can't use, then they self-organise and take that out to places who need the food, so the food doesn't get wasted. So we have a zero waste policy as much as we can. We compost our waste from the cafe up on site in our hot compost bins, so then any waste that comes out of the cafe goes back into sort of nourishing the market garden. The whole system, it's a system approach. You know, we're really looking at sort of closing the loop, being zero waste, carbon as neutral as we can be. All the products we bring in are all sourced or from organic farms, and so that whole system right across the whole organisation is completely environmentally sustainable.
And behind all that is the whole idea, the charity's name, Earth in Common here in Leith. Now, it's been a hard slog. I think it'd be fair to say that. I've seen some of it at close quarters. But this is a kind of special moment. After more than a decade of work, we have the new centre. It feels like a time of hope. There's all sorts of possibilities for the future. Do you feel that, or are you just knackered?
It's been a long decade. I think that there's been, we face a lot of challenges, like the very fact that the croft is 2 acres of land means that it's a really massive project. Sometimes the land is actually bigger than the operational team that manage it. I think that different funding programs don't really suit exactly what we need. So there's lots of challenges, but I think that we've overcome an awful lot over the last decade, and I think that with the new building, the new centre, and the new name, because obviously we moved from growing crops in pots to now being Earth in Common, which we feel is a more sort of grown-up name that suits our environmental purposes a lot better. That having the new building centre is really giving us a home on the croft, a home of which we can operate from. Back in the early days, we were operating from a little shed, and there was all sorts of ingenious ideas going on to make it work. But having the building just gives us that ability to actually, take produce, turn it into cafe products, and then really working with a seasonal menu that's coming out and being produced for the people to enjoy. So it gives us that next level of operational ability, I think.
Brings in a wider public as well. So, 10 years hard work. We're looking forward to the next exciting decade. Thank you very much, Evie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Here we are, in the heart of urban South Edinburgh, in the old mill village of Ellen's Glen. This is where the Via Regis, the royal road into Edinburgh, crosses the Birdie House burn. If we continue in that direction, the burn takes us to the Royal Infirmary. It becomes the Nidri burn. It becomes the Brunstein burn and flows into the Forth. But in this direction, we're headed up towards South House, Gilmerton, Birdie House, and eventually the Pentlands. This is one of the hidden green places of Edinburgh that lets us into the Birdie House Valley Glen. We've come half a mile. We're here now at Gilmerton Dykes. We're going to walk through the tunnel where we see one of the murals created by the Friends of the Birdie House Valley Park. We've 2 miles further still to go. A green corridor that takes us through South House, through Birdie House, and up towards the Pentlands, where this burn rises amidst the springs and sources of the hills. It's a green corridor, and travelling up this corridor are trees, birch, alder, ash, willow, fir, animals, foxes, stoats, birds, hawks, magpies. This is one of the ways that nature journeys into and out of the very heart of urban Edinburgh. The old ones say that originally in Scotland there were only 3 things. There was the forest covering all the land. There was the wild, untamed sea. And there was the skies where the stars and the constellations moved. And on the edge of the forest on the coast was the Watcher's Tower. The Watcher guarded the movement of the heavens and watched the people of the forest, the kindly forest folk who lived on the nuts, the mushrooms, the berries, who lived free. But the Watcher was suspicious. He was looking out for trouble, for rebellion, for discontent. He did not trust the people of the forest. Bit by bit, he acquired soldiers, an army. And as more and more soldiers were drawn from the people, and the old forest people were more and more restricted, their discontent grew. And then the Watcher of the Tower said, yes, this proves what I've said all along. These people are discontent, restive, they cannot be trusted. The forest must be cut down. Every tree must be levelled so as everything can be seen from the tower. And great saws and axes were brought, and there was a tearing and a rasping and a grubbing and a destroying of all the beautiful trees of the forest, until only one tree was left, the mighty oak, the old king of the forest. Tear it down, said the Watcher. We can't, said the men. Grub it up, they said. We can't, it's too deep. Bring the old women of the forest here now, said the Watcher. And the women came and they said, no, no. They said, our art, our healing arts are for making good, for wellness, not for destruction and poison. He said, now pour the poisons into the roots of this tree. and they brought the secret essence of the old fungi and the lichen, and they poured it into the roots of the tree, and it began to crumble and to die. And as the tree crumbled and the roots broke and opened up, there beneath the tree was a serpent, a mighty ancient dragon. Its hide was encrusted with jewels, and its great eyes were dimming and weeping tears. "Tear the jewels from its hide. I knew there was treasure here," said the watcher. And the men went down and began to tear away the jewels. The women gathered the tears, for they knew that those tears had the power to reverse, to cure any poison, any ill. The great old dragon rotted away. A great stench grew from where the roots had been. But amidst that slimy mulch, there was an egg, a perfect oval egg. And in that egg lay the secret of the stars and constellations, the secret of life on earth, the secret, the seed of a new dragon. And some people say that to this day, that sleeping dragon, that new green creature, lies recumbent in the Pentland Hills, waiting to come again, to give new life and new healing to our green city. Let the green dragon arise.